There's been a lot of talk about the president losing support, especially on immigration. Polls last week suggested that a majority of Americans had lost faith in ICE. And there's a new poll from Siena and the New York Times that finds President Trump underwater with voters. Just 40% approve of the job that he's doing on immigration. Yet the goal he's trying to accomplish still has broad support. Despite all the chaos, despite the tragic shooting of Renee Good, despite all the negative press generated about ICE, half of Americans still support the Trump administration's deportation of immigrants living in the United States illegally, while 47% oppose it. Now, contrary to what the liberal media would have you believe, that's not support just for deporting the worst of the worst. That is support for deporting every illegal migrant in the country here illegally. Now, other polls have even higher levels of support. Surprisingly, the new New York Times poll has independents supporting Trump's deportations by a 12-point margin at 54%, and even 42% of Latinos approve of his deportation agenda. Here with us now, former advisor to Bill and Hillary Clinton, Richard Goodstein, and former Democratic strategist and author of Nothing Left, Evan Barker. Thank you both so much for being here. Evan, I want to start with you. You're from a working class Midwest background, people who were Union Democrats for generations who now are very big Trump supporters. This is the exact constituency that everybody's going to be fighting over in elections to come. Explain to us why immigration is so important to working class Americans.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Batya. So basically, as you already stated, my family used to vote for Democrats, and the majority of them, all but I think one at this point, has switched over and now ardently supports Donald Trump. And, you know, it's important for many reasons. I think, you know, I actually live in California now, and I find that this issue of immigration is the most difficult for them to wrap their heads around. And I think part of it is that, you know, in a place like San Francisco, there has been a whole parallel economic system set up to invite illegal immigrants, undocumented people over to this country to work, to provide cheap labor to upper middle class, to wealthy Democrats, as you so often point out, and to basically make it cheaper for them to live, to make their lives easier. And then you contrast this to small town Missouri, right, where there isn't unlimited resources for rent assistance. The schools don't have adequate funding. You know, the rents are exploding for people like my mom and grandma who, you know, live together in an apartment building with many, many migrants, actually. I'm not sure of their status, but it has, you know, increased the rents for them. They've seen it with their own eyes. And so I think that they see their economic position slipping away, and then see at the same time the Biden administration allowing all of these people to flood into the country and giving them things like Medicaid in California and rental assistance and free hotels in New York City. And it is extremely infuriating to them when their lives have basically worsened in every conceivable way over the last 30 years.
Richard, your reaction.
So in that New York Times poll, Trump is underwater by 17 points on the topic of immigration. And I think it's cartoonish to talk about it as, you know, one or the other. There's two issues at work. One is getting out bad guys and sealing the border. And I think on that, Democrats generally think, bravo, we should have done it, you did it, great. But what nauseates people is when they turn on the TV every night and they see these ICE people deploying these Nazi tactics. I'm sorry, mass people in unmarked vans, grabbing people out of their cars who are simply protesting, a passer shot in the head in Chicago, a 4-year-old who was in chemotherapy being deported, who was an American citizen. That kind of, and Renee Good, you know, I heard what Michael said about she drove into him. Look at the video. That's just simply not true. If the guy had been doing something other than using his phone and a gun at the same time, he would have seen what was going on, which is that she was steering away from him. And this myth that somehow or other she was trying to take him down, that's all it is. And everybody in the public sees that. And I think where Trump is hurt is he believes people like Michael Knowles. And that's why everybody, the young, non-white, have made a total U-turn in the polls and at the voting booth. The reason that Trump and Republicans took it on the chops in pretty much every election, federal, state, and local, in 2025 is because they're turned off by what's happening on the streets in immigration, in addition to the cost of living and everything else.
But can I ask you to respond just to what Evan said about how voters, I agree with you that there has been a shift on this topic in terms of voters watching the news, et cetera. But to me, it seems laughable that they would then give power back to the Democrats on this issue, given everything you heard from Evan, specifically about how working class voters feel like their fortunes were abandoned. Can you respond to
Sure.
that?
Donald Trump campaigned on a lie. He said, I'm going to bring prices down. Every economist would have told him, short of a depression, you can't do that. And guess what? People are angry because, and the middle class that Evan's standing up for, they're paying higher prices. They're paying much higher prices, radically higher prices, for health care. Because I think Evan would probably tell you that health care is really important to her and her family. Whether it's Obamacare or everything else.
Okay, let's actually bring Evan in to talk about this, because Evan, you do talk about health care a lot and how important it is. I assume that you feel very positively about the immigration agenda. What is your explanation for why Trump is suffering in the polls?
Yeah, so I do agree. I think that overall, you know, when I talk to people in my family back home, they don't like seeing images of 5-year-olds being detained by ICE. You know, like, obviously, you know, they're people with good hearts, and that bothers them. At the same time, you know, the mandate was, from their point of view, that they wanted every illegal immigrant out of the country. It doesn't matter if you just came across the border and you overstayed your visa, or if you came here and committed a horrible crime. That's what they voted for. They feel Joe Biden let 20 million people in. 10, you know, we can debate the numbers, whether it was 10 million or 20 million. And at this point, there has to be a fierce reaction to what happened. Now, as you know, to what your guest just said about healthcare, yes, I do talk about healthcare. I think that the biggest mistake that this administration has made is that they defunded Medicaid and have now let these Obamacare subsidies lapse without any real plan to reform healthcare. I think that they should have.
Absolutely. It's something that I try to explain to them a lot, which is that when you cut subsidies and then give tax cuts to the rich, you're taking benefits from poor Republicans and giving them to rich Democrats, because most rich people in America today are Democrats. Evan and Richard, thank you both so much for joining me. And Protect You, please come back very soon.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.